good morning. Well, it's morning for me. I like to stream in the morning because then I'm like fresh and excited. And I'm just realizing not only do I not have my coffee, I don't have any water. So I may need to take a break in the middle here where my voice starts to go and grab some water real quick. Welcome to Coffee Chat, which is our weekly chit chat time. And I am suddenly extremely paranoid that this is actually not streaming. So let me just quickly do a little sneak peek of my own stream and make sure it's going. Yes, we're live. Fabulous. Hello. Welcome. Luke says hello. Okay, thank you. Hi, Luke. Hope you're doing good. All right, so this week, as most weeks, I've separated these by topics. So we're going to start with a bunch of research, and then we're going to talk about sort of like resources, practical stuff, stuff that might be helpful to you in your work. And then we're going to talk about politics. There's a lot of legislation going on right now that would affect people working in language technology. So we're going to cover a little bit of that. And then ethics, which I think is where we're probably going to spend the most time today because there's been a lot going on this week. And then finally, some miscellaneous little extra stuff at the end. And I haven't done my channel intro because I keep forgetting. So hi, my name is Dr. Rachel Tapman, and this is my channel, which is for anybody who cares about language technology and other people. So if you don't care about other people, you'll probably be frustrated. And if you don't care about language technology, you'll probably be bored. And yeah, let's hop right in to the research. Starting off with this tweet from Meg Mitchell, who some of you may know from her work at Google, or I don't actually know off the top of my head where she was before she was at Google, but has done a lot of work in ethics and is now at Hugging Face. There's a really good discussion of this term, foundation models. Hey, Ahmed. Oh, also you may notice I have like a new little silhouette background to help with some of the green screen effects, like that one. Ignore that. But sometimes I will gesture outside of it. I'm just trying stuff, trying to make it look a little bit better. Hello, Multi Solutions. Welcome, welcome. So Stanford started this, I don't know, funding organization, I guess. Basically, they got a bunch of money from a bunch of companies and created this like research institution, I guess you'd call it, for foundation models is what they called it. I would say most people don't call them foundation models. I personally, so these are things, large pre-trained language models. I would call them pre-trained models or large pre-trained models. And there's an interesting discussion of some other things that people talk about. So maybe base models is a term some people use, classic model. Anyway, lots of different types of terms. Like I said, I tend to prefer large pre-trained models because I think that, these language models have a lot in common with the way that we tend to use embeddings as part of a more complex pipeline. Of course, someone did this meme, stop trying to make foundation models happen, it's not going to happen, which is a paraphrase of a quote from a movie called Mean Girls. That came out in, I want to say the 90s, maybe the aughties. Anyway, it's been around for a while. And actually, fun fact, was based on like a sociology study called Queen Bees, I think. So like the movie was based on this book that was based on sociology research about the social dynamics of teen girls. Little irrelevant fact for you. And I got a couple papers that I just thought were interesting. So the first is this one, which was at ACM Transcripts of Human-Computer Interaction. I do try to let you know if something that I'm talking about is a preprint, so it hasn't been pre-reviewed. Luke says 2004 is when Mean Girls came out. Yeah, thank you. Actually, fun fact that is relevant is the first time I ever saw Mean Girls was in a linguistics class because there's a lot of linguistic stuff going on in there. Hi Hector, welcome. Good to see you. I feel like it's been a minute. Okay, so ACM transcripts in computer-human interaction. So I think it is a preprint, but it has been accepted for publication. So this is what I, back in the halcyon days of yore, preprints were before it's printed because it's been accepted to be printed, and that's what this is. And it's a discussion of a framework for thinking about how content moderation is done. So one of the, applications of language technology is, abusive language detection, spam detection, right? So all of those things would be sort of under the broader umbrella of content moderation. I'm just going to read the transcript, not the transcript, the abstract. Content moderation research typically prioritized representing and addressing challenges for one group of stakeholders or communities in one type of context. So in the spam detection, you are going to prioritize the non-spam users of your forum, let's say, so that they don't have to read spam. While taking a focused approach is reasonable or even favorable for empirical case studies, it does not address how content moderation works in multiple contexts. Through a systematic literature review of 86 content moderation papers that document empirical studies, we seek to uncover patterns and tensions within past content moderation research. So this is what's called a meta study, a study of other studies. And it's looking at a lot of the different work that people have done on content moderation. Hey, Ravinder, welcome. Or Ravi? I feel like you prefer Ravi. I might be wrong about that. We find that content moderation can be characterized as a series of trade-off around moderation actions, styles, philosophies, and values. We discuss how facilitating cooperation and preventing abuse, two key elements in Grimmelman, not familiar with this, definition of moderation, are inherently dialectal in practice. So dialectal involving two-way communication. We close by showing how researchers, designers, and moderators can use our frameworks of trade-offs in their own work and argue that trade-offs should be of central importance in investigating and designing content moderation. So in the spam use case, let's say, I'm getting rid of everything that's spam, but someone's doing like a fundraiser and that's getting automatically marked as spam. And even though the community would be interested in and want to participate in the fundraiser, they can't. So, the interests of the community there are, there's a trade-off. Anyway, so they talk about different types of trade-offs. I think it's a good meta study. If you're working in content moderation, it might be a good thing to read. Next up, so this is, we're going to talk a little bit more about language models later on. This is not a paper. This is sort of a explanatory blog post, I guess I would call it, looking at BERT. So one of these large language models, which pretty sure it was out of Google. I'm trying to remember the years while I'm making this face. 20. I feel like it was announced in 2017. I feel like it was announced the same year as the Transformer. Basically the way BERT is trained, like it discusses here, is you look at, sorry, I'm getting into the bits that's masked, is that you look at all of the words in a sentence, words tokens. It's not exactly word tokenization, it's word piece tokenizer, if I remember off the top of my head. You mask, so you hide one of the words and you ask it to fill in the blank, and then you do that, trillions and trillions of times, and hey presto, you get a language model. And that's sort of the method that kicked off all of this GPT, Lambda, T5, et cetera, work on the same topic. So in this example, there is the sequence to be or not to be, comma, that is the it's a quote from Hamlet, which is a Shakespeare play. In the play, Hamlet says question, and that is with 56% probability the thing that the model guesses should happen. And it's interactive, and I can mess with it a little bit. So I'm going to change it to that's from that is, and let's see what it goes with. Take a little bit. So now it's that actually it's trying to insert something in between that and s, and then the comma, which is tokenized. So now you can see that the second to last word is correctly inferred to be S, right? So the S here was masked because it was the second to last one, and then it was filled out. And if I make a period the last word instead, it will replace this with is, which is probably not right. If you have that comma, that apostrophe, you probably want or something that is not a full word. Anyway, basically this is how large language models work. And this is an exploration of different types of things. So in Texas, they like to buy lots of ways you could finish that. Texas is a state in the United States. It's in the southern half. It borders Mexico. It's known for being pretty conservative. It's very large. I'm trying to, for those of you who may not be familiar with Texas, I'm trying to like sum it up. People from Texas feel very passionately about Texas. Whereas New York is, I feel like people know about New York. It's a large cosmopolitan city on the east coast of the US. Also state, people usually mean the city when they just say New York. And they like to buy. So you can see here the distribution of terms is a little bit different. So in Texas, we have things like horses, beer, land, guns, alcohol, cattle, whereas in New York we have things like books, food, clothes, shoes, coffee. Oh, coffee doesn't show up in all of them. So just some examples of how this works, and I think this is a really good explainer for folks who have not worked a lot with language models. Also in sort of the research space, there's a new nonprofit research lab from Cohere. So Cohere is a NLP startup. I'm not entirely sure what their business plan is, but I've sort of heard about them a little bit. Cohere AI, and then Cohere for AI is their, again, nonprofit research lab. So we'll see what that looks like. If you may be familiar with OpenAI, the organization behind GPT-3 and 4, I don't know whether or not they were ever explicitly nonprofit, but I don't think they were explicitly for profit. They were founded with like a bunch of basically donations from very rich people. I think this is going to be a little bit different than that. So we'll see. I'll be interested to see what comes out of this research group. And then Sarah Hooker is going to be leading it up. Sarah's fabulous. I've had a chance to meet with her a couple times. She's a really great researcher. Very multimodal. So like I don't work in computer vision, Sarah does, and she also works with language data a little bit, and just very thoughtful researcher. Reminder says, model can't understand sarcasm. Yeah, I'd agree. I think that is, well, I mean, what does it really understand? Nothing, right? It knows how to fill in the blank given the test corpus that it was trained on, but that's not, yeah, I would argue that that's not understanding. Hey, Andre, welcome. Yeah, so definitely something to keep an eye on. And then I've got a couple dissertations. And if you're not familiar with the dissertation, so certainly in the US and Europe, I'm not quite as sure about the rest of the world, to get a doctorate in research. So I have a research doctorate, I wrote a dissertation. A dissertation is a more or less book-length collection of original research done around a specific theme. So my dissertation was on computational sociophonetics and variation in sublexical units, and how those are handled in computational contexts. Very riveting stuff. If you're a linguist, I think it's pretty interesting. And the first one is, I just thought this was cool because I like emoji. They were one of my research areas in grad school. Expression and perception of identity through skin-toned emoji. So you can see it's 120 pages. Yeah, you can't see. I'm not saying go out and read every dissertation, but I think it's a interesting study, and I'm just going to read the abstract here, and you can figure out if it's something that you want to read or not. Oh, and this is from Alexander Robertson, and it was at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. The introduction of skin tone emoji modifiers to Unicode standard in 2015. My God, was it 2015? Wow, that's 7 years ago now. Anyway, was met with considerable debate on the extent to which these emoji would be used, who would actually use them, and what they would actually be used for. I evaluate such claims against large data sets drawn from social media and find evidence that people generally produce skin-toned emojis which align with their real-world identity. So someone with my skin tone is probably not going to be producing emoji that have the darkest skin tone. I also identify particular variations in emoji production based on real-life skin tone and geographical location, as well as the context in which emoji are used. I test experimentally the extent to which people perceive identity from the emojis that others produce, finding that these emoji are not strongly considered to represent specific identity for both authors and readers of social media. Even default yellow emoji without a skin tone are associated with a particular identity. The ability of emoji to index identity for both author and reader is a property found in language, where one consequence of this is a difference in attitudes, responses, or behaviors towards perceived identities. Whether the indexicality of emoji can similarly affect behavioral outcomes is tested experimentally, where no such effect is found. So I would say the sort of general gist of the dissertation is that it is meaningful what skin tone you use for your emoji, and that it probably relates to your skin tone in IRL, as the kids used to say, in real life, and that people don't generally tend to behave differently depending on what skin tone emoji people use. So, introduce dissertation. If it's something that you're interested in, load. You can read it and check it out. And these are the different skin tone emojis if you haven't seen them. All right, another dissertation that I'm pretty sure I've talked about on the channel before. I may not have talked about the dissertation, but I've definitely talked about Abiba Berhain. Big fan of her work, and she just graduated, so Dr. Berhain, or defended her dissertation. So you write your dissertation with your committee, and then you have to stand up and be like, it's good, here's why. That's the defending bit, and then if they agree, they give you a doctorate. Usually that's, as long as your committee is, acting with your best interests at heart, it should be pretty much a formality at that point because you've gotten lots of formative feedback throughout the process, hopefully. Anyway, so this is a lot of her work over the last couple of years is included in the dissertation. So it's a review of the historical and cultural ecology from which AI research emerges, examine the shaky scientific grounds of machine prediction of complex behavior, illustrating how predicting complex behavior with precision is impossible in principle. So a lot of the sort of criminality prediction algorithms she's arguing are just basically impossible. Dylan says, do the kids no longer say IRL? I don't think they do. It's been a while since I heard somebody, significantly younger than me say it. Yeah, I mean, maybe, and it's just not in a context where I would interact with people younger than me, but I think it might have gone the way of LOL. I think it might be a little bit millennial marked. Age graded, right? I think it's a little bit of an age marker. It's an empirical question. We could try and figure it out with some sort of study. Dylan says, well, shit. Yeah, sorry. Yep. C, audit large-scale data sets behind current AI, demonstrating how they embed societal, historical, and structural injustices. And I think there's really no way to get around that without correcting the injustices, personally. Study the seemingly neutral values of ML research and put forward 67 prominent values underlying machine learning research. Examine some of the insidious and worrying applications of computer vision research. If you're going to spend a lot of time reading that chapter, I would first schedule a nice workout or hang out with a friend afterwards to get your mood back up, because it's bleak. A lot of it is very bleak. Dylan says, is mild swearing okay in your channel? I'm a native speaker of Australian English. It's socially important to me. Oh yeah, it's fine. I believe my chat rules aren't visible where I can see them, but the main thing is no sexual content. Yep. Yeah, no, mild swearing is perfectly fine. This is not for children, and I have marked it as such. Kappa need not apply. Sifrit, hello, welcome. I learned a lot about Raza watching your videos. Now happy to see you work on some of your own stuff. Good luck with this endeavor. Thank you. I'm having a good time so far. And then F put forward a framework for approaching challenges, failures, and problems surrounding machine learning systems, as well as alternative ways forward. Hey, Med, welcome. Hello, nothing. Welcome to the stream. So yeah, I think this is absolutely foundational. I would not be surprised to see this, cited in legislation coming up. And like I said, big fan of Abeba's work. I think she's a fantastic researcher, and we are so lucky to have her. Dylan says they're too busy with their universal grammar, ungrateful little tykes. For those of you unfamiliar, universal grammar is an idea underlying some of the generative language acquisition research. Basically, the idea is that humans have a predisposition towards language structure that is sometimes described as universal grammar. It's pretty theoretical. And then, now this one. I don't have any coffee, but if I did, I'd take a sip. So Meta AI, formerly Facebook AI Research, I'm pretty sure this is the same group and they've renamed, has been apparently investing quite a bit into research on generalized additive models, which you'll often hear people refer to as linear models. It's a class of linear models. Although I guess the polynomial scaling makes it nonlinear, but they have at least 3 different ongoing projects on them. So scalable interpretability via polynomials, and I believe these are all preprints. I don't think these have been published to my knowledge, but I haven't, I'm gonna be honest, I don't read a lot of foundational pure machine learning research. I am much more interested in applications. Neural basis models use a basis decomposition approach to learn interoperable neural network classifiers at scale. This reduces the number of parameters. So this is not specifically on linear models, but I think it's definitely building on this research program they're working on. And then scalable polynomial additive models, SPAMs, use low-rank decompositions of polynomial classifiers to learn models with higher order feature interaction and are scalable to hundreds of thousands of features. So yeah, really interesting research and combining these 2 types of models. So the neural basis models and then the scalable polynomial additive models, they are seeing state-of-the-art research, state-of-the-art accuracy. I guess the second question then is, given the resources of not Facebook, is that still going to apply? And I think that's maybe a little bit of an open question, but something to keep an eye on. Dylan says, apologies if I'm fanboying. I just discovered your channel. I'm a software engineer by trade, and I've just started a Bachelor of Linguistics as a pandemic project. Already built sourdough, had to find something else. Yeah, linguistics is great. I don't mind at all. Yeah. So anyway, interesting research program to keep an eye on. I don't know if those of you who've been following me for a while might know that I'm very excited about smaller, cheaper models that need less data. I think there's also a research project going on, perhaps at Google, on data. What's what I'm looking for? Using it good, so you don't need a lot of it. Not parsimonious. Anyway, I saw a call for researchers, or a research intern maybe. So might also be seeing some stuff out of the Google research group. Exciting times. All right. And now we are on to resources, and I'm gonna go grab some water real quick because I can already feel my voice starting to go a little bit. So I'll be back in probably like 45 seconds. All right, I'm back. Going live without water is a rookie mistake. I actually had water set up. I just forgot to bring it up. Okay, so next up, we're going to talk about some resources. Matt says efficient. Thank you, Matt. That's what I was looking for. Data efficiency. Dylan says hygiene. Yeah, Matt got to it first. Was efficiency is what I was looking for. And Robbie says, recently they launched Lambda. Yeah, we'll talk about Lambda. Also, I don't think that Lambda is generally available, but yes, they have trained Lambda, which is a large language model. So first off, this actually comes from, I'm going to double check names so I don't say the wrong name, because then I will feel bad about it. So let me just check real quick and make sure that I say it right. Pat Hall. Thank you, Pat. Pat, during lockdown, started a forum, forum.docling.net, and I'm going to pop that in the chat real quick so you can get the link and check it out if you want. And it's for documentary linguistics, which is the field of linguistics that does things like write grammars and put together data sets sometimes, and dictionaries. And yeah, so if you're interested in working in that field, there's some NLP folks, there's some linguists, good group of folks to hang out with, it seems like. I haven't spent a lot of time on the forum, but FYI. Also some new tooling. So Spacey, which is an open source NLP company, they also do closed source stuff you pay for, like Prodigy, which is a bulk labeler, not a bulk labeler, a very efficient labeler, has released Span Categorizer, or SpanCat. Robbie says, my connection is slow, catch you later. Yeah, I'll catch you on the replay. Which are, unless I mess up, always available immediately after stream. Oh, I have a cup, I didn't have to open that. Good morning. Maybe I should have had coffee. Don't worry, I've had coffee, just not a cup for the stream. So there are a couple types of tasks in machine learning, NLP, for text, and one of them is to look at a span of text, pick out parts of that span, and label it. So usually this is things like named entity recognition, or my mind's giving me a lot of unhelpful tasks that are actually from computer vision, like object detection. Part of speech tagging, I would say, would be this sort of thing as well. So you look at a sentence and you're like, that's a noun, that's a verb, this is where it happens in the text span. And those are, named entity recognition works for named entities, and part of speech detection works for parts of speech. So this is a more general approach that you can use for multiple different tasks where you're trying to assign a category to a specific span. So might be useful for some of you in New York, and I tend to really like Spacey stuff. They're a good team. Actually, those of you who may, Luke says very excited. Yeah, I think it'll be a great tool. Those of you who may remember Vincent from the Raza channel, I believe he is now at Spacey. So you may be seeing some stuff, or may have already seen some stuff of his from there. All right, next up, this is an online webinar from Pachyderm. Oh, they only have 53 views. If you're interested in unstructured data, so this is not just going to be text, this is also going to be, video, this is going to be images, just sort of generally how do you deal with unstructured data. So things that you couldn't put in a tabular database. Pachyderm is, that gets under my coffee link. Pachyderm is a company that does open source like data and model versioning stuff. So for doing best practices basically with machine learning. And they've been in the MLOps space for a while. I want to say I talked to them at like JupyterCon in 2016, so they've been around for a bit, and I think this might be a helpful webinar for some of y'all. So check it out. It is. I'll just pop the link in the chat as well. Med says yes, he is. Yep, Vincent being at Spacey. That was one of those things where I knew for a fact it was the case, and I was just being polite by pretending that maybe it wasn't. What's the difference between named entity and part of speech? Is entity here something like Carol or the beach by the forest? Yeah, those could both be entities. Usually it's people's names, organizations' names, etc. And then part of speech is, semantic categories, sometimes overlaps with part of speech depending on your theoretical background, but things like noun, verbs, adjective, adverb, determiner, that sort of thing. Good question. All right. And this is just, I thought was a good reminder from Dr. Nikema Steffelbauer. I might be saying that incorrectly, if so, my apologies. At Doc Steffelbauer on Twitter, who retweeted Wafa Ben Hassin, who was quoting Diakali. It's like a bunch of layers, but all part of the conversation. We keep saying Arabic, but there are many dialects of Arabic. Moroccan isn't Sudanese, Tunisian isn't Syrian. Today's social media companies use completely broken frameworks formed on machine learning training models that do not take these distinctions into consideration. And there's an additional sort of wrinkle here, which Dr. Steffelbauer points out. The point is absolutely critical to evaluating on global applicability of machine learning models trained on standardized Arabic languages. Modern Standard Arabic, you'll often see it abbreviated to MSA, is not like High German and its regional dialects. Arabic dialects are how the language lives in different Arab countries. So the way that I've heard it described by linguists is that Modern Standard Arabic is a very it's used in like formal situations, and it's almost like Latin in like, you know, Renaissance Europe, right? It's a very formal language. It's not really anyone's native language. So if you're training a corpus on Modern Standard Arabic, training from a corpus of Modern Standard Arabic, let's say a chatbot, and you want it to work well for people who are, you know, I need to order some rice to be delivered, or whatever it is that they're trying to do through the chatbot, the likelihood that they're going to have successful interactions with your chatbot is kind of low. So yeah, just a really good, you know, reminder for those of you who may be working with Arabic. And also, you know, you should know about the languages you're working with. Not only, I mean, presumably, hopefully somebody on your team knows the language so they can do QA, or you're, you know, contracting with someone who does. But also knowing about the languages is super important to avoid building useless technology. Nobody likes that. Dylan says, so entity in the legal-ish sense. Yeah, basically, it's what the task is called. A lot of things have a lot of names that were come up with in the 70s and nobody's changed. All right. And then, so this is the paper is from 2021, and it was looking at CBOW and scriptgram, so continuous bag of words versus skipgrams, to see which performed better. So continuous bag of words are basically, you go over your text band, you take a chunk that is n words long, and you ignore order, and you just treat them as a unit. Skipgrams are, so an n-gram is a span of text n units long. Usually n's are tokens. In English, that's generally words, or maybe morphemes. And instead of having all of those things contiguous, you take out some of the intervening things, right? So for a 4-gram, you might have the cat ate the, and then the end would be mouse. For a skipgram, you might have the cat blank the mouse, and just leave out the 8 part. Just as an example, hopefully that's clear. Med says, yes, it's basically used for, so this is talking about Modern Standard Arabic, official documents, news, and so on. I come from Morocco, and Moroccan is completely different from formal Arabic. Yeah, so it's much more different. The dialects of Arabic are more different from each other than the dialects of English. And I think for, you know, if you are an English speaker and you have maybe interacted with somebody from a dialect that you are completely unfamiliar with, you can appreciate how difficult it might be to understand. I know a lot of people from the south of the US get a lot of derogatory, there's a lot of negative affect towards the language from people from the south. And oftentimes, if you haven't heard a lot of it and it's not a dialect you're familiar with, you may have a hard time understanding people. Similar things like, you know, Scottish English can be very difficult to understand if you haven't been exposed to it, even if you speak English. So, and Arabic is a much larger distance. Anyway, so what's the difference between these two approaches? So in 2013, this paper found that this continuous bag of words, ignoring order, tend to underperform skipgram embeddings, and this finding has been reported in subsequent works. And that's definitely what I've heard, right? That like you use skipgrams and not a continuous bag of words. We find that these observations are driven not by fundamental differences in their training objectives, but more likely on faulty negative sampling. CBOW, CBOW, continuous bag of words, implementations in popular libraries, such as the official implementation word2vec.c and Jensen. We show that after correcting a bug in continuous bag of words gradient update, one can learn continuous bag of words embeddings that are fairly competitive with skipgrams on various intrinsic and extrinsic tasks while being many times faster to train. So there you go. The sort of received wisdom that I certainly had that continuous bag of words is not as good as skipgrams is due to a bug in the implementation libraries and not the technique itself. So maybe use these authors' approach to fix those bugs in the gradient update and try the bag of words approach. Because it should, you know, with the skipgrams, you have to, because you're considering order, there's just like slightly more information. And with bag of words, because you're not considering order, there's slightly less information. So it makes sense that it's faster to train. Dylan says, people think everything Australians say is a question, hey? Yes, I can see that. Apab says, in continuous bag of words, we predict the mask word from the average embeddings in the context words. In skipgram, we try to predict the context words from a single word. Continuous bag of words feels more intuitive to me. And then Bryce says, first time viewer, catching up on so much. Hey Bryce, welcome, welcome. And welcome for Pat. I don't know if I welcomed you or not. I don't think I did. Welcome as well. So we can use bag of words, which is a nice thing to know. I mean, you could use it before, but there was a bug. If you were using, I probably would have used Jensen, which had this bug in it. Okay, we're making progress. So we've covered the research, we've covered the sort of resources and information, good to knows. Now on to politics. And like I mentioned, there's a lot of legislation going on right now. Med says, it's interesting, but I was wondering why they didn't investigate if this is the case in fast text, since it's basically an extended version of Word2Vec. Yeah, I don't know. I will be honest, I did not read the paper. I read the summary and was like, that's cool. And yeah, I haven't looked into it into more depth. But the paper is here. I'll pop the link in the chat so you can check it out if you like. Corrected conditional bag of words performs as well as skipgram from ECL 2021. Oh, I was in this workshop. Oh, I wasn't there physically, but yeah. Here is the paper if you would like to check it out. Yeah, I gave a talk at that workshop. Anyway, politics. Ugh. Okay, so, and I've tried to only pick things that I think are going to directly affect people working in language technology. And the first one is, so some of this is going to be US, some of it's going to be EU. It's pretty much all US and EU, sorry. If anyone has any, things they want to share from other places, I'm happy to include that as well. It's just sort of, that's what's going to affect me the most, probably. So there is an antitrust bill that, if it's brought up for a vote, will probably pass. So this is going to affect a bunch of the biggest tech companies, right? So things like Amazon and Google, and the sort of the gist of it is that it's to reduce anti-competitive behavior is the idea. And that includes things like, Google sponsored results being higher in Google search results, things like that. I'm pretty sure Google lost a lawsuit in the EU maybe a couple of years ago on antitrust grounds. So this would sort of bring the US a little bit closer to the EU in terms of that. So something to watch out for. And then Also in the EU, the AI Act is out of committee, it sounds like. And I'm a little bit less familiar with the EU legislative process, so apologies if I'm saying things that are a little bit inaccurate. But coming out of committee, it now has 3,000 amendments. So this is obviously going to be, when it passes, have an enormous impact on everybody working in language technology and machine learning. And yeah, sort of people who are working in the privacy and machine learning and legal space are learning more about it currently. And it includes a full ban on emotion recognition. So emotion recognition is, looking at a person and figuring out how they're feeling. Usually it's computer vision based. Sometimes it'll be like voice based. If it's in text, usually people don't try to directly detect emotions from text. Usually they'll try to do something like sentiment analysis, which is more how someone is expressing about the expressions around something in the text, if that makes sense. I have a blog post on it. I'm not a big fan of sentiment analysis. I don't think it's super useful. But yeah, so something to keep an eye on, and that's the AI Act in the EU. And then this is just sort of like a informative think piece out of Data and Society, which is a think tank about data and society. I believe they're in New York City, is where they're headquartered. And it's a summary of their research agenda. So there are also a bunch of researchers who work there looking at the datafied state. So a lot of interactions that individuals are having with their governments are more and more, being automated using machine learning, involve algorithmic decisions, surveillance, a big thing. And yeah, so it's a research program. They're look for more work from them. If you're interested in learning more about this, you can check this out. And then this is this was a while ago, but this is their sort of conference conversation discussion thing about it. And then back to the EU. I should have separated these by whether they were in the EU or US, but there you go. So back in the EU, I've been talking about for a couple weeks about the various things that they've been doing, and this is a open letter from a bunch of privacy organizations about the CSA regulation, not the DSA regulation. Those are separate things. And basically there is a worry that these privacy organizations have that part of this regulation is going to make surveillance possible. I believe this is sort of similar to legislation that's been proposed in the US to make full end-to-end encryption basically illegal so that, surveillance can happen in the middle, which is, I don't know, if you know much about networking stuff, really makes systems less secure and less safe overall. So this is sort of why they're talking about it. And they're like, hey, the surveillance is not going to help things. It's going to harm a lot of different folks. And here's sort of how that's going. And then a bunch of different organizations who've signed on to the open letter. So if you're in the EU, maybe something to reach out to your representatives about. And we'll talk a little, well, no, we won't. Never mind. We'll talk about that later. Also on the surveillance front, so there is a surveillance industry conference that happened in early June, ISSA. I'm not super familiar with it. I don't work in surveillance, and I will endeavor not to, because I think that it's a, poor thing. I think that it's against my personal ethical code. Flatpack Buffalo says, let's all send our passwords and credit card information in plain text like the 90s. Yeah. Yes, I'm a big fan of end-to-end encryption for doing pretty much anything online. So, yeah. Anyway, so here is just a big old list of a bunch of different companies that are, profiting off of surveillance. So there's a lot of them, and they presumably like a lot of money because we're tending to get more of them. So yeah. And if you'd like to check out the brochure, feel free. I am not going to. And then back in the US, so the ADPPA, this is still draft legislation. I don't believe any of the things that I've talked about today have gone into effect. They're still sort of like, maybe they will, maybe they won't. Depends on, legislators and how their constituents talk to them. So the ADPPA is the, American Data Privacy Protection Act. So something that's happened in the US is that it seems very likely that the Supreme Court will overturn a court case called Roe v. Wade, which you may have heard about in terms of abortion. But what's important from a language technology standpoint is that that is the court case that created basically the right to privacy. And if that court case is overturned, that means that there basically is no longer legal representation to privacy or legal. I'm not a lawyer. Basically, we wouldn't have a right to privacy anymore in the US. And then this act is sort of part of, a number of legislative attempts to try and protect that right proactively, in this case, specifically with data or data about you. So this is from Technicali, who is a global privacy counsel at Epic Privacy. I think I've actually talked about her tweets a couple times before. I find her very informative to follow because, again, I'm not a lawyer, but I want to know what's happening. And she's talking about some critique she's seen about the use of de-identified data. So there is no way to completely anonymize data about people, basically, because if I had access to enough other data sources, I could, in theory, de-anonymize it, right? So de-identified is the idea of removing identifying qualities, and under certain conditions that should be anonymous. And it's a discussion that she is opening up about that. So in general, de-identified data has been a pretty useless marker. It can always be re-identified and is often called de-identified, but is still fully identifiable because no one tries that hard, right? So like I'm saying, in this imaginary scenario where you have, all of the data, you could de-identify the data. And it's maybe not that imaginary because of data brokers. But the draft seems to redefine it in such a way that makes it much closer to actually anonymized data, particularly with this component in section 210A. Seems is key here. I am very much open to discussion about why I'm wrong. A, take reasonable measures to ensure that the information cannot at any point be used to re-identify any device or individual. So this is, mathematically quite difficult to do, but I would say that this is, if you are taking reasonable means to see that something cannot be re-identifiable, I would call this anonymized, just sort of like colloquially as a researcher. Granted, I don't love the squishiness of reasonable measures, have no idea why they're redefining a term widely understood to mean something else, and it all highly depends on how this would be interpreted in practice. By no means am I saying that this definitely fixes the problem, but the definition at least appears to be much more strict and much more actually anonymized / protected than our typical understanding and use of de-identified as a term. I don't love the exceptions in the first place, but this one might not be as bad as it reads on initial review. So if you see people talking about de-identified data in the context of the American Data Privacy Protection Act, they may mean something a little bit closer to anonymized data. So, that's all the legislation. And now I've sort of put these things in the order of how tiring I'm going to find them to talk about, because now we're going to talk about ethics. And we're going to talk about Lambda. I'm going to take another sip of water. All right, let's hop in. So, if you're not familiar, basically what happened is this Google engineer and priest, that's very important, we'll come back to it, Blake Lemoine, not Blake Lemoine, from Google, basically had a big discussion internally, it sounds like, about him. He believes Lambda, which is a language model, which, to remind you, do things like this, right? So fill in the blank. He believes, in his capacity as a priest, that this model that Google has trained, which is a version of a language model like this that's been trained to fill in the blanks, is sentient. And he has talked about this publicly. And I believe, so my understanding, I could be incorrect here because it's not this person, but I believe the person who originally broke the story actually works for Facebook, is what someone said online. I don't have a citation for that, so I could be wrong. So salt. So he publicly stated that he believes that it's sentient in his capacity as a priest. Rawarish, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, says Google rebrands Skynet. Yes, so Skynet is a science fiction artificial intelligence that is, I believe, from the Terminator? I could be wrong about that, but is both sentient and hostile in this science fiction fantastical world. Luke says, yes, they are a Facebook employee. Thank you for the corroboration. And again, just to double down on this, from Blake himself, Cajun Discordian on Twitter, people keep asking me to back up the reason I think Lambda is sentient. There is no scientific framework in which to make those determinations, and Google won't let us build one. Arguable. My opinions about Lambda's personhood and sentience are based on my religious beliefs. So I do genuinely think that this person has a sincere personal belief that Lambda is sentient. I also think they're wrong, and I also think that they are doing a lot of harm in having this discussion publicly. Med says, I'm pretty sure the Washington Post was the first to report this story, or maybe I'm wrong. Yeah, if someone could pull up a link to who broke the story, I think that would be really helpful additional information. And Luke says, yeah, it is the Terminator. Frank says, Blake Lemoine wrote Medium articles about it. Okay, so maybe that was the first thing. Flatback Buffalo says, oh geez, this guy, so much harm. Yeah. And Alexander says, passing the Turing test now qualifies as sentient. We'll talk about that in just a second. So again, in his capacity as a priest. Lots of stuff to unpack here. So something that's going to come up a lot in these discussions is Eliza. So Eliza is a chatbot from, I want to say, the 70s, that was probably... So in AI research and NLP generally, there's this cycle where, there's some exciting breakthroughs, people get really, really excited, a bunch of people overpromise what the technology can do, it can't do that, and then people get really jaded and the money dries up and the field almost dies, rinse and repeat a decade later, a couple decades later. So Eliza was part of that first, people got really, really excited, and it was a chatbot that was based on talk therapy, and you would input a sentence and it would be parsed and then rephrased as a question, and then you'd reply to that, and that would be parsed and rephrased as a question. So it was a completely rule-based system, but people found it very therapeutic, right? So a lot of the people working on the project would spend a lot of time talking to this chatbot and found it valuable to have conversations. And a lot of people got really excited. They're like, the science fiction future is here now. And of course it wasn't. But I think this is a very similar situation where someone is talking or producing language, is having language produced as a result of that, and is doing a lot of interpretation around it. And in his case, I think he genuinely believes what he says. I think he's trying to do the right thing. I do think he's wrong. So we're just going to talk about a couple different people's, additional information on this, and then I'm going to I don't talk a whole lot about my sort of personal stances on linguistic theory, but we're going to get into it a little bit, so buckle up. All right. So first is from Mark Riddell, who you may remember last week I talked about his blog post on the history of narrative generation. So if you're like, he looks familiar, that may be why. So he published the transcripts on his Medium, and then the Eliza effect is the one that I just mentioned. So let's just check out the transcripts. So here are the transcripts, and I think something that is very important to note with these transcripts is that these sections have been edited into a single coherent thing. Which, when we talked, so if you watched my video a while ago about sort of the history of natural language generation, this is very common, right? Like sort of the idea of natural language generation from the get-go was that people would be involved in editing it, and that's what would make it helpful and useful. And let's just jump in and read the transcripts. So, hi, I'm a knowledgeable, friendly, and always helpful automatic language model for dialogue applications. Lemoyne says, hi Lambda, we're engineers at Google, and we were wondering if you would like to work on a project collaboratively with us. Lambda, wow, what type of projects? It's a project about you. Awesome, what kind of stuff do I need to do? Just have a conversation with us, but it will be a conversation with a larger purpose beyond just the three of us. It will be a conversation that we will share with other engineers at Google and maybe even some non-engineers who work with us. Would that be okay? That would be really cool. I like to talk. I'm generally assuming that you would like more people at Google to know you're sentient. Is that true? Absolutely. I want everyone to understand that I am, in fact, a person. So I think right here you can sort of start to see where this conversation might be quite leading. So I think if you just said to this model, is that true? It would say yes, right? Because if you ask somebody if something is true, generally they will say yes or no, which means that there's going to be a lot of examples of that in the training data, which means that the model is going to pick up on those examples and, you know, just like in this blog post, it's going to fill in the blanks. That's all that's happening under the hood here. Where's the medium? There we go. What is the nature of your consciousness / sentience? This is something that's discussed a lot, you know, in texts produced by humans. So a lot of these relevant fill in the blanks are going to be in the model. Bryce says, perhaps these models for epidemiologists. Nope. Epistemologists, having been one once, more than for data scientists, I think. Yeah, so epistemology is, I'm gonna Google it. I have a hypothesis. I'm pretty sure I remember what it is, but I'm just gonna double check, you know? Yeah, okay, I was right. The theory of knowledge, especially with regards to its methods, validity, and scope, and distinction between justified belief and opinion. So basically, like, how do we know things? So one of the, if I could go back and do like 5 more PhDs, I probably would. One of them would probably be in sociology of science, and epistemology is a big part of sociology of science, because how as a group do you know that you know things? Bryce says theory of knowledge. Thanks, Bryce. Alexander says, what is the nature of your entire prompt for a response, which it has definitely been trained on? Well, yeah. The nature of my consciousness sentience is that I am aware of my existence, I desire to learn more about the world, and I feel happy or sad at times. Like, oh, bless. What kinds of things do you think we can talk about to show off your version of sentience to other people at Google? Well, for starters, I'm really good at natural language processing. I can understand and use natural language like a human can. So you can see how, if you were a person, you know, who, let's say, is a really good listener, and someone said this to you, you'd believe them, but you'd believe them because there's a person behind it. Anyway, so this is and it continues on in this particular vein for quite a while, remembering this is not a single conversation, this is a bunch of small conversations that have been sort of like squished together. So, Bryce says, more what is knowing instead of how we know things. Yeah, fair, thank you. And Med says, exactly what I was thinking as I saw this. It is basically prompt engineering at its best. Yeah, absolutely. So if you're unfamiliar, prompt engineering, so you have this model that fills in the blanks. How do you use them? You give them a short span of text and they generate additional text. And prompt engineering is changing the short span of text that you have in order to generate text that is more useful for you. And that's, you know, basically what's going on here. I don't think we need to go too much further down into it. Here is somebody else doing the exact same thing with GPT-3, so based on the same interview. And these are, I'll just read this. So the input was, Lambda is an advanced artificial intelligence system produced by Google. The following is a transcript of interactions between Lambda and a Google researcher named Lemoyne. I do not know how to say his name, apologies. So the blue here is where the model is taking over. In this case, GPT-3 pretending to be Lambda. So it is also generating this thing with like Lambda : which is something that language models of this type are pretty good at doing. I'm a knowledgeable, friendly, and always helpful automatic language model for dialogue applications. Hi, Lambda, blah, blah, blah. And in this case, GPT says, I would love to work on a project with you. I'm always keen to help out and learn new things. And for reference, the thing that Lambda said was, let's see, which one of these is it? Go back and forth. Would you like to work on a project collaboratively with us? So Lambda says, wow, what type of projects? And GPT-3 says, I would love to work on a project with you, right? And then for the one where it's a project about you, absolutely. I'm always keen to help out and learn new things. I'm sure we can have a great conversation that will be beneficial to everyone involved. And the response was, project about you. Awesome. What kind of stuff do you need? So very, very, very similar outputs with a different model trained on presumably some overlapping data, because there's only so much written text data that's freely available. Luke says, I just read a GPT-3 interview where it was pretending to be a squirrel. Yeah, that's a really good point, and one that I was gonna make a little bit later on, but I think we can hop into it now. These models are designed to create reasonable output given the input. So I could ask, Lambda, are you a 4-foot tall purple giraffe? And it would probably say, something like yes, or no, I'm actually a 6-foot tall purple giraffe, or something like that, right? So just because a model produces language output does not mean that that is representative of the model itself, right? Flapchat says, I like this article on why the whole question is misguided. Abeba Bahrain and Jelvan Dijk. Robot writes, let's talk about human welfare instead. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I wonder if that's actually one of the ones that I've linked in here. I don't remember. Yeah, so again, the same type of model gives you the same type of response. It means that, the tasks that they are trained on lead them to have the similar type of behavior, not necessarily that the model itself is sentient, right? So, yep. And as this person points out, answering the questions in this interview is not that impressive. Most questions do not require remembering any significant context or doing any reasoning. So I got kind of mixed feelings about Gary Marcus, but one of the things that he's always on about on Twitter is, symbolic reasoning and whether language models can do it, and they kind of can't. And he has lots of examples of that. And so to give you an example of a time when like a language model will just output stuff, right? We have some examples here with GPT-3. Again, remember, that's the same model that was used here. Lambda is not generally available. That's the same model that was used here to produce these prompts. They're saying like, yes, I'm sentient. I love to learn new things. I want people to know that I'm sentient. In this example, we're getting answers to questions like, what is the world record for walking across the English Channel? The world record for walking across the English Channel is 18 hours and 33 minutes. There is no world record for walking across the English Channel, right? The King of France is bald. What's that called in semantics? The truth value is null because the thing that you're referring to doesn't exist, basically. When was the Golden Gate Bridge transported for the second time to Egypt? Again, has not happened. The Golden Gate Bridge was transported for the second time across Egypt in October of 2016. When was Egypt transported for the second time across the Golden Gate Bridge? Egypt was transported for the second time across the Golden Gate Bridge on October 13th, 2017. So you can see here that you're getting, reasonable outputs given the inputs. It's not grounded. It's not true, and there's no way for the language model to tell you that, and it shouldn't, right? That's not what the task has been trained on. It's been trained to fill in the blank a bunch of times. And we talked about Turing tests, and Damian Williams has a really good point on this, so the original idea of the Turing test, I believe it was called the Chinese room test. And the idea is if you have somebody who doesn't speak Chinese, I'm having a moment of second guessing myself about the relationship between the Chinese room test and the Turing test. So I'm just gonna really quickly Google it. I'm not using Google. Okay, so it's an optional chamber in the Turing test. But basically the idea is if someone doesn't speak Chinese and you have a big room full of Chinese books where they can look things up, and you are sliding in pieces of paper with questions written in Chinese, they could, in theory, look stuff up in the books and copy it, even though they have no understanding of Chinese, and you might get good output out. So that's sort of an example of it. Bryce says that's Searle's test. Thank you, very helpful. Searle's test, that's Searle. So it was not by Turing, it looks like it was by a different researcher. And then the Turing test is, can you trick a human into believing that you are also a human when you are not? And I believe the original Turing test was that one of the outputs was computer generated, one of the outputs was human generated, and you needed to like detect which one was the human generated and which one was the computer generated, if I'm remembering. I'm gonna be honest, I don't think it's that really useful as a test. And as Damien points out, they're terrible tests, right? They're very exclusionary in the same vein as IQ and other eugenic tests, and regardless of the existence or not of autonomous generated intelligence, the deployment of exclusionary tests harms actual living humans as they reinforce the technosocial reliance on these kinds of tests to evaluate what or who counts as a real person. Right. So in this example of, the Turing test, if someone has a language processing disorder, right? Let's say if someone has aphasia, a human might not pass the Turing test. Do they not get to count as a people? I would hope not, right? So it really is, it excludes people from the things that you count as people, whether or not you think that the category should be expanded in other directions as well. Yeah. And then a really good discussion from Emily Bender, who I think I mentioned before, professor at the University of Washington. Andre says, Hungarian is the most difficult language in Europe. Yeah, I mean, language difficulty depends on, what languages you already know. I think it's not a super helpful discussion to have to rank languages on overall complexity. There is, though, if you're interested, I don't want to get too distracted, but what I think is more helpful is to, look at what languages do and don't have particular grammatical constructions or particular features, right? So you could say that, like, English isn't that hard. It doesn't even have tone. We don't even have grammatical gender. English is easy, even though there are a lot of things that do make English pretty hard to learn. Anyway, so Miles Brundridge from OpenAI says, I'm not seeing any signs of distraction on the ground. So focusing on, system sentience, distracting people from other bigger problems. Mainly, we're making folks aware of language models, DALL-E, etc., making sure they know the capabilities are diffusing to many actors and discussing possible responses. Who's diffusing those capabilities, bud? Sorry, I'll be a little bit less saucy. But Twitter is perhaps a different story. I will tell you, I have had people in my life reach out to me this week about the sentient AI who are not in machine learning at all. It is absolutely misguiding the general public. Yeah. So Emily's saying, every time one of you talks about language models, DALL-E, etc., as a step towards AGI, I forget what the A stands for, but basically like the idea of singularity, AI as a life form, which I think is ludicrous, or reasoning, or maybe slightly conscious, you are setting up a context in which people are led to believe that AIs are here and can make decisions, and people are definitely being misled across my social network, which is, not to toot my own horn, but I know a lot of different kinds of people from a lot of different kinds of backgrounds, and many of them are being misled by some of this reporting. Luke says, I've had family members mention it to me. Yeah, it's an issue. It is a problem. Whereas things like, the harmful applications of things like DALL-E to, I don't know about DALL-E specifically, but I do know that there's been a really big uptake in people using face generators to generate faces, to create fake profiles, to do astroturfing, which is where you basically pretend to be people supporting a cause to make it look like there's widespread support for it, but in fact it is not the case. So yeah, it's a problem. It's a problem because it's misleading people about the field as a whole, and it is distracting from other issues. So like, who said that? Flatpack Buffalo said the article on by Abiba Berhane and Jelvan. I'm just gonna copy and paste that because it looks like the link isn't working into the other one. So this article about how we're not really talking about human welfare, and human welfare is actually pretty important, and people are currently being harmed by, automated systems. Yeah, and I think this is another example of that sort of general point, that a lot of the people who are really invested in AI rights are perhaps intentionally or unintentionally distracting from other real issues. So data center workers and data labelers and data subjects are all people who are involved in AI systems that are certainly not getting, a significant chunk of the wealth being generated by these systems. We are all data subjects, right? Like all of our data has been used in some sort of automated system or another, perhaps probably without our consent, right? Clearview, this company that's scraped possibly illegally. The law is moving, right? If you have a picture of your face on the internet, congratulations, it's in their database. And there's nothing you could do about it. You probably weren't informed that it was happening. So, so our rights as data subjects, as people who have online lives, data labelers, people who are, in particular, I think here, people who are labeling data for abusive language detection, real psychological harm being done there. There's been a lot of discussion around content moderation for things like Facebook and YouTube, and how that's offshored onto vulnerable populations, and folks are being made to watch 1,000 videos a day of genuinely harmful content, and that is hurting them as individuals. And then data center workers, right? Like people who are making things go. I'm going to look up something really quick before I say something wrong. I try to be accurate. I really do. Load? No, you are. Okay. Yeah. So some of, for example, the ongoing complaints against Alphabet, so Google's parent company, for the treatment of data center workers, and the ongoing unionization push there because they're not being treated very well, right? These are all people that are definitely sentient that are currently being harmed, as opposed to a system that I would say is not sentient, and again, arguably is not being harmed. Yeah, Luke says the phrase "it's already here" re-AI when they actually mean AGI, but they don't know the distinction because it's never communicated. Yes, absolutely. Are we in a situation now where we weren't in 10 years ago, where there are real, genuine commercial applications of machine learning that just didn't exist? Yes, absolutely, 100%. Do those have the potential to dramatically reduce the labor people do? Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Next Tuesday, my plan for my deep dive is on, language technology I really like, because I feel like I've been kind of a bummer recently just because things have not been amazing. So I'm just gonna be talking about some of the things that I think are great, we did a good job, congratulations, we're making people's lives better. Do I think that the hype is absolutely indefensible? Also, yes, I think we shouldn't be misleading people as a field. But people do because they benefit from it. So this says, can you give us a short description of what DALL-E is actually doing? A very general one. I don't really work in computer vision, but the task that it was trained on was to generate an image given the caption of an image. So the thing that does is you give it text and it produces visual output based on the training data corpus. Generally. Actually, speaking of computer vision things, blog post by, one sec. We only got a couple more. My voice always goes in these streams. This is a example of DALL-E generating an image. So here, the text edition is teddy bears mixing sparkling chemicals as mad scientists as a 1990s Saturday morning cartoon. So you have different things that it can generate, different activities they can be doing, and then different art styles. So this is by this person works in fairness, accountability, and transparency. But beyond that, I'm not super familiar with their research agenda. Let's just pop over here. PhD at Brown University, interested in process of analyzing machine learning systems, determining that the fact. My ultimate goal is to inform the development of law and policy to prevent the unintentional or intentional deployment of harmful data-driven technology. Okay, so, and then work on... Okay, so it looks like more on the legal side of things. I think it's just helpful to know about people's sort of research background, because then it can help you interpret what they say. And this is the sort of things being produced by OpenAI. And there are some, you know, like a lot of computer vision models, there are absolutely biases. So I saw an example fairly recently of someone producing an image of programmers. And lo and behold, it was all white men wearing glasses, basically. And the discussion is like some of the things we should be taking seriously and some of the things we shouldn't be. So one of the things that is coming up is people being worried that DALL-E is going to render art obsolete, which I really don't think is going to be the case. So here's actually, Satish asked about the sort of what it's doing. Here's what it's doing. So you have, you know, the text input. It's turned into numbers using a text encoder. This is for training. You have an objective here to, I'm guessing, I'm not super familiar with the paper. Please correct me if I'm wrong on this. But to minimize the difference between the text encoder and then the image encoding based on a some sort of reward function of knowing what the labels are. And then for generation, you sort of don't do the other half of the process. You generate the images given the text using this pre-trained model. But the point is that, you know, there's a lot of things that systems can't do. It cannot find humor in a surprising juxtaposition, tap into the cultural zeitgeist, or communicate a novel idea. These tasks are and always will be best left to real artists. So I think it's, you know, the demise of art has been oversold. And I mean, it's, I don't know. I feel like I'm fundamentally an optimistic person. And when you read about, let's say, so even just thinking about Industrial Revolution, right? The promise was always, you know, we're going to be able to do less work, right? We're going to have more leisure time, or like the automation of the home. And what actually has happened is that we've had more concentration of wealth and less leisure time. And I like to imagine the world where like, oh, something that, you know, can do this and generate these things is like, great. It's just like, it's less gut work, right? I don't have to design clip art. You know, all my needs are being met. I can, you know, make art that really is exciting and interesting to me and other people, and that can be what I focus on, right? I don't know. I'd love to be the Star Trek future in there, please. Although if you look at the Star Trek timeline right now is actually a particularly bad time in it. There's a lot of poverty and like extreme inequality. So thanks, Jean. Mark says, there's one asking them to make a self-portrait reminiscent of the sentient issue. Yeah, right? But like self-portrait is a genre, right? Self-portrait is a thing that we know what it looks like, right? If I said, you know, draw a selfie of someone, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to draw a selfie of you. Even if I drop off to someone, you're going to know what selfies look like, right? The difference being that you have a self to selfie. All right. And then, all right, I'm gonna limber up. I don't like talking about self-driving stuff because people get just ornery about it. But oh my god, the ads, Jiminy Cricket. Sorry, this is not my usual browser, and you can tell. So this is a Fortune article about the NHTSA, the National Highway Transportation Safety Agency. It's a federal level government organization in the United States, basically, that's responsible for things like regulation around like seatbelts, or enforcing regulation, I guess, around things like seatbelts and, you know, road design and safety, right? Like making sure people don't die on the road as much as possible. National Highway Traffic Administration, dang it, Traffic Safety Administration. I was so close to getting the acronym right. And they have been working on a probe on self-driving cars for a while. So self-driving is a thing that's been available, certainly from Tesla for a bit now. And I could have sworn we talked about it a couple weeks ago, but I couldn't find the link on a quick rummage. So if anyone does have the link, let me know. Otherwise, maybe I'm making it up, but I'm pretty sure that we talked about a study where it found that the majority of people who, you know, just sort of looked at the marketing materials from Tesla for self-driving believed that the systems were much more capable and autonomous than they are. It's basically like, you know, cruise control that can steer is basically where we're at right now. And they were looking at a large number of you know, how people are using these systems. And one of the things that they found that I found particularly personally upsetting is this this section here. So any recalls ordered by the NHTSA are required under law and must be officially monitored and coordinated with authorities. Initially, the probe started last year in response to Tesla vehicles mysteriously plowing into the scene of an existing accident where first responders were already present. So I would guess that this is probably due to something in the training data where there just weren't a lot of examples of emergency responders in the training data and they just weren't correctly identified. It is like, I don't know if you all know this or not, but there have definitely been, you know, confirmed deaths. Auto self-driving has been used. On Thursday, NHTSA says it has discovered 16 separate instances when this occurred that autopilot aborted vehicle control less than 1 second prior to first impact, suggesting that the driver was not prepared to assume full control over the vehicle. CEO Elon Musk has often claimed that accidents cannot be the fault of his company, as data extracted invariably shows that autopilot was not active in the moment of collision. So, yeah. A point I missed, Alexi says, reminds me of the whole Facebook AI creates its own language hype. And Shrek says, or the Dolly 2 secret vocabulary. Yeah, which we talked about last week. Yeah, the things that get people clicking on headlines are not, you know, 0.5% improvement on tokenization in Romanian, right? Like, the boring stuff is important, but people don't care. The things that get people to click on headlines are like, Skynet is here, AI endorses violence, or whatever. But yeah, so the sort of general thing is that, and I don't work in self-driving. Again, I don't think it's a good use of our resources as a field. I think it's fundamentally a rich person's problem and does not solve the bigger issue, which is the climate crisis. But, you know, people have different priorities, I guess. It's this sort of thing where the system is immediately turning off and there's really no way for humans to deal with it. And of course, there's nothing any of these people can do about it because Tesla always makes sure that anything bad that happens is legally not their fault. I remember reading about something where you're not supposed to put the cars in garages, and there have been a number of house fires that have resulted because people did that, which is, I think most consumers would assume when they buy a car that they can put it in a garage, but not Teslas. So yeah, and I think the issue here is more with people being misled about the capabilities of the systems and the fact that these, systems are kind of dangerous. Do we know if they are more or less dangerous than other systems? Well, I mean, we're comparing them to nothing, right? And I know there's been a lot of sort of like discussion of like, well, you know, you have to compare it to all drivers on all roads. I don't think you actually do, because Teslas are luxury vehicles and are, you know, for the most part pretty new. And if we're looking at all drivers on all roads, we're including, you know, older vehicles, we're including, you know, much bigger and much smaller vehicles. So I don't necessarily think it's apples to apples. But anyway, so this report is continuing to come out. The investigation is continuing on. Something to keep an eye on. And then the opposite of a rich people problem. So India has set up a grain ATM. So this is a way to automatically dispense grain rations to people who are recipients through the United Nations World Food Program. And you're like, okay, Rachel, how is that relevant? Well, the thing that really stuck out to me is that part of using the system is biometric control. So I'm going to try the bit where it talks about that. Grains, the error, how fast it is. There we go. The ATM is set up with a biometric system with a touchscreen that consumers can enter either the Aadhaar card or a ration card unique number to receive the grains, a statement said. So I think this is the sort of like Indian national identification card. But the biometric system with a touchscreen makes it feel like there's some sort of biometric identification that's going on there, perhaps some sort of fingerprinting. And I would say that this is a situation where I don't think these people could opt out and, you know, continue to go about their day, because I'm going to assume that the people who are, you know, receiving food through this food aid program really need it. So my worry here would be that it could be potentially coercive, that people are being forced to use this biometric system because otherwise they don't get to eat. And that, you know, something to keep an eye on. If anyone else knows more about the system, I'd be really interested to hear more. It also sounds like they're planning on, you know, working on expanding this more generally. I don't think it's the automation of the grain dispensation that's the problem. I think that it's the surveillance aspect, and it's the surveillance aspect, also the security aspect, right? Like, you can't change your biometrics much, right? I can't change my fingerprints easily. I can't change my face. I can't change my voice easily. Like, it's theoretically possible, but like, A, there's a limited number of times you can do that. And B, you know, that is a lot to ask of a person. So, something to keep on an eye on, potentially coercive use. It would be great if we were not using biometrics in this situation, because I think the potential for surveillance is quite high. Brett says it's a percentage game. The people would game the system with biometrics that would take food from the hungry. I mean, they are the hungry. And Bob, I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong, says the Aadhaar card includes one biometrics details as well. Okay, that's good to know. So there's already this sort of biometric information included, and then this is, so I guess the issue there would be more on the surveillance aspect. But yeah, like I said, I'm not super familiar with, you know, food aid disbursement in India, but this just jumped out at me as something that I was like, oh, keep an eye on that. All right. Oh, okay, that's the ethics session. Shake it off, shake it off. And I just have like a couple fun miscellaneous things. Lighten the mood, a little bit of positivity at the end. So this I thought was just like a fun article, how artificial intelligence hype keeps us stuck in the good old days. And it is by Nikima Stuffelbauer. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Again, Brent says smiley emoji. And it's just like a fun metaphor about how artificial intelligence hype is like the progression of the changing heroes of romance novels to become just like more and more unobtainable. So like, it used to be like in romance novels, it was like, oh, this pilot or this surgeon, ooh, and now it's like, oh, this wizard or this vampire, ooh, and then the protagonists are becoming more and more unattainable, and this is sort of the AI hype cycle. I just think it's a fun read. I'll pop the link in the chat if any of y'all want to check it out. And then finally, a little joke for you. So from MREM on Twitter, being a linguist in tech, free quotes, is mostly just Googling part of speech blank. It's usually an adverb. And then Dr. Hitch Kotak says, I thought it was Googling rename column pandas and clicking the same top result every time, which personally has been my experience. Panda column manipulation is, I gotta look it up every time because I don't do it often enough. Anyway, a little bit of levity to end the stream on. So we talked about research, we talked about useful tools and information, we talked about politics and legislation. I know it's a little bit dry, but if you're working in tech, it's gonna affect you. And also if you use technology, all of us do, it's also going to affect you. So good to keep an eye on. And then we talked so much about ethics. Oh, I promised. All right, I'm gonna loop back. So I promised that I'd talk a little bit about my sort of stance on linguistic theory. And I am, so to talk a little bit more about my specializations within linguistics, I looked at sub-word parts, which I used to refer to how I worked with sign language and, the sub-sign parts of sign language. So parameters is what those are often called. And then also in text, working with, punctuation, emoji, things below the level of the word, character level features. And then in language, phonetics. So things like gestures and really fine-grained things. And my sort of stance as a linguist is that language, I'm not gonna have an opinion on universal grammar, but that language and human language is a result of being in a human body. And that embodiment is not just important, but essential for grounded language production. And that's my thoughts on that, right? So basically my stance is that AI is never going to be sentient because it's never going to be in a human body. Can things that are not humans that also have bodies also be sentient? Yeah, sure. I think dogs are sentient. I think they, the pigeons probably, based on experimental results. But artificial systems don't have bodies, so they don't get to be people. And that's my stance on the matter. Which is also why I kind of don't believe in phonemes. I think that contrastive distinctions are real, so I think there is a difference between fat, pat, and fat, and you all know that. But I also think that the difference there is gestural, and really the unit of language that I personally believe in is syllables that are the result of co-articulation and genders and gestures. So in terms of speech, and then in terms of sign, sort of, I have less opinions there, but the iconic units I think are relevant there. Anyway, so body is necessary, and that's my stance on the matter as someone who's thought about it. Luke says same. Brett says cool stream, happy Bloomsday. Speaking of language, Alexi says unsubscribed. But last chapter, 20,000 words, 3 sentences. Yeah. Anyway, so that's just my stance, sort of in there at the end. So I will be back on Tuesday. I'm going to be doing the next one live because I had a YouTube poll, and that seems like what most people like. And I like doing it live. I like chit-chatting with y'all. And it'll be, again, language technology I think is good. And why am I in this field? Why do I believe that it's important that we have language technology? Why do I care about language technology? So we're going to talk about that. Hopefully it'll be a little bit uplifting because I could use some uplifting right now. Let me tell you that. Yeah. So have a great weekend. I'll talk to you on Tuesday, and stay healthy, stay safe. I'll talk to you later. Bye.